Little does anybody know that before there was a Jim Goad, before there was a Sam Hyde, before there was a Frank Hassel, and before there was a Smooth Sanchez, Professor Pilleater once got in trouble by the police for having hate speech on Twitter. That's right, when I was about 18 to 19 years old, I had a normie Twitter page, which I uploaded interesting art. And before there were hate bots now, centering you if you say knock yourself out or shoot all liberals, even as a joke term, Twitter has bots to control you. But back then, a decade ago, there wasn't bots on Twitter, and people could get outraged more, and they didn't understand kind of the more avant-garde hate comedy going around on Twitter, which is so profound. As long as you have an anonymous account, you can say whatever you want, from political assassinations to trying to kill someone. It's as if the language of threatening is now considered a norm through the wild, wild west of the internet. So this was a time when I was charged for hate speech on Twitter. And I would like to discuss what happened to me a decade ago. So in summer of 2011, I believe I just got done high school, I believe, and I didn't know which college to go to, so my parents sent me to a community college, and, was kind of bored and in the middle of that, and so under this Twitter, I wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, if someone had to shoot up X school, I would do it. So X is the school that I was coming from. I was very explicit what high school I was going through and my anger and hatred for that school. Well, unfortunately, when I tweeted that, there were people or kids who basically stalked me and hated me, and everyone knew, even in 2010, 2011, I was the incel school shooter at this particular high school, and I was bullied constantly. And so one of these kids reported this to them, and they all basically had a frame game on me. So I remember watching Tourette's Guy on my computer, and a cop came to my parents' house. And basically a kid who hated me shared the tweet to his friends, and one of his friends to a middle-class bourgeois teacher, whatever came out of that black lagoon. And it wasn't because they feared their lives, as you would think during a terroristic charge. It's because they hated me and ridiculed me in the past and only wanted to harm me further. So when the cop came to my house, realizing there was nothing he could do, that I had no guns, no weapons, he checked, and he knew I was an innocent kid in a good, well-to-do house. The only thing he could do was terroristic threats, as these 4 individuals all wrote complaints about my school behavior, beyond what I wrote a tweet in the last 48 hours. Interesting, right? That this tweet, if not reported, could have just been in cyberspace, and yet I was being watched by a group of kids in high school who wanted to hate me. So I know who these individuals are, and they were all predominantly white and middle class, Pennsyltucky lowlifes who basically went to state school and probably work at their dad's auto mechanic work or something like that. And it goes to show you that this little Pennsylvania society I was a part of is incredibly hostile to anyone who's an outsider to their disgusting, degenerate values of being middle class and bourgeois. And so the irony was that my expensive lawyer got me off the case. And as of now, I have no criminal record. And if I would have got the criminal record, I would have had to do community service and do jail time or whatever. But again, my lawyer got me off the case. So what happened? Basically, it was social ostracization against me as a young person. In that tweet, I said, if, as a joke, looking for attention out of emo angst within that subculture, realized that the school, with evidence, there was evidence, was looking to push me out of their public school. This is because in the past, they had to directly pay for my private high school that I was a part of, as they didn't want to. I was previously jumped by blacks who hated white people in that public school, and the blacks charged I hate whitey. So they were seeking justice to frame me as some like low-life racist abusing their system. And they did everything in the past, from calling me a racist, inciting violence against African American peers, and predominantly getting Philadelphia blacks into their white suburban gated communities, and, further ostracizing me from extreme politics in the classroom and doubting to teachers. And so the anti-white narrative, as white nationalists would like to call it, was pretty apparent at the end of the 2000s era. And I was a young kid that had to go through that horrible 1984 public system as their happy Columbine figure to target, and I loved to agitate them, So in other words, I was in a bad environment and no one was on my side, as my lawyer would say. And I currently now, but look at me now, I am currently now a part of the progressive cosmopolitan society, away from this Pennsylvania Spiersberger, or Philistines for that matter, that make up the town my parents bought a house in. And so, long story short, I don't have a criminal record. And back then, they outrageously tried to charge any student in the public education system, if you're predominantly white, male, and blacks didn't like you, nobody liked you because you were yourself, you were constantly faced with ostracization. And the community where my parents lived in tried to basically get me out. And it's because of a money issue. Maybe because they wanted me on Ritalin so they could give money to the pharmaceutical companies, or that they didn't want to pay for my private school. The joke's on them, really. And the joke further goes when my lawyer wins the case for this. So during that time, about 2-3 years later, I remember one time a cop pulled me over in that same neighborhood. And that neighborhood, by the way, is King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. So I basically ran a red light in that same town. That was it. I ran a red light. I pulled over, and I was like, oh crap, there was a cop. Cop was pretty in a good mood. He pulled me over, looked at my record, and then he laughed. Says, terroristic threats? I mean, did you have a bomb factory of sorts when you were 18? And I laughed, and I said, well, I hate the public education system. I said I was going to shoot my teacher or something, or shoot my school. And I didn't get the charge for running the red light. We laughed, and he let me go. He basically said it was a verbal not to go over the red light, but he was a really good officer, and he kind of knew about the goofiness of, how can you predominantly say a white male is somehow this evil mastermind bent on shooting up your local school? I further elaborate in another lecture of mine, which if you can pause this lecture and go view it, is Frank Hassel versus Smooth Sanchez, Avant-Garde Hate versus Criminal Intention, where I discuss that today, 10 years later, it is very popular to make threatening charges against one another and not even go to jail. I mean, Smooth Sanchez did the whole bomb threat on film, and I guess 8 people reported thinking he was a bombing terrorist. But I ultimately start to believe that Smooth Sanchez, previously before his bomb threat, everyone knew him in New York as that troublemaker. And so they have to build up a resume and then find the little things before they could slap and charge you with 5 years in prison or whatnot. And the same with Frank Hassel. If Frank Hassel keeps doing his old threatening charge and doesn't care how much e-girls he gets on his side and his predominantly ugly features just like Sam Hyde, he will probably go to jail too. And they're just trying to find it. Is there just more of a leeway? Why is there more of a leeway today? Well, again, we have gentrified white kids prancing around with Black Lives Matter and destroying property and doing criminal behavior for free out of their parents' trust funds. Some of them will get arrested, most of them do not, and they think it's revolution. While in the upper class, we have Samuel R. Delaney, a black professor who hates cis society and writes child pornography works, right? And Jeffrey Epstein with his amazing Lolita Island. It makes you wonder how depraved and decadent our society is, so as long as you have this will to power or some type of, as much money as you have, you can do whatever you want. And so, using these defense, it just shows you what is hate speech anymore. What is a threat? If Antifa says, kill the white working class or whatever, they're not talking about violence. They're saying, as our mighty leader Joe Biden likes to say, Antifa is an idea, not a threat of violence. So I depart with you students to read these 4 books. And the first one is William Golding's Lord of the Flies, which you probably had to read in high school, but a bunch of, young English kids, I hope it's not pedophilic in nature, what does it mean to be in groupthink and individuality? Can kids really create a paternal society, or they're immature students of the sorts? It makes me feel like it's Antifa. Imagine if kids had a police force. The female equivalent of that book is Joan Lindsay's Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I do prefer over Lord of the Flies. And Picnic at Hanging Rock is interesting because they're all women. They're all girls at a women's college that I sadly went to. I went to a women's college too, thinking it would be different. But it goes to show you that any gynocracy or matriarchy, women kill themselves. Women have it much worse than men. And when women try to rule society, they end up doing more damage. The maternalism cannot replace the paternalism. And to get this further across, Louis Duquesne's book, I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm pretty sure you're thinking of the 90s slasher film. Duquesne is a great writer. But, you can read any Duquesne book, but I Know What You Did Last Summer kind of exemplifies how young people cover up crime. How young people never have adult responsibility to lead up. It's often the small little Gilbertsvilles and horrible rust towns of America are the ones that are depraved. The white ghettos are kind of worse than the black ghettos because the white ghettos create their own hillbilly low IQ society. And to go with the Jeffrey Epstein and Sam Delaney case, Ursula K. Le Guin, or Le Guin, whoever you want to say it, in her story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Emilas, often taught in ethics class or philosophy, it's really about her eyewitness to the science fiction pedophile scene. That there were a few pedophiles of the sorts, including Jewish, that would touch boys and whatever, and get away with this homosexual crime. And Le Guin wrote a ethical story that a utopian society, for it to work, needs to beat up and rape a kid in order to make them sane. And this brings up the ethics, whether you want to walk away from that society or not. I certainly walked away from King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and white society as a whole. And we must think of ourselves in that such of a way, to walk away and to find paternalism. And to ultimately destroy this goofiness of big tech, big brother ruling us and complaining because we don't understand words, right? Let me get to that. So most strong, tough guys are verbally abusive, especially men. One slice of power to them, they can be terrible adults. Our society worships those who have Vilzamok, will to power, right? Not to do with politics or power or Machiavellianism. It's people expressing themselves in this kind of solipsist, almost narcissistic way. However, where is the paternalism? And are we smart enough to tolerate speech that can't hurt us? I mean, they say words are mightier than a pencil, right? Or words are mightier than a fist, right? If that's true, then why are we clamping down on people who make terroristic threats? Are we that weak? How do we define it, And why do we worship some hate speech and terroristic threats over others? It's extremely vague. Are we breaking down as a society and people are weak and everyone's triggered in their snowflakes? Who can get away with such acts? I want to end it by recalling a 2016 leftist professor who on Twitter said that all I want for Christmas is a white genocide. Now, in this liberal mumbo-jumbo talk, white is a class structure. It doesn't mean admixture European people. He's saying, all I want for Christmas is suburban class genocide, which I would agree on. It's very edgy. But then when people translate it as admixture European people over class, he's hated. And even Drexel, the university he comes from, condemns him. And this whole anti-white narrative that took about a decade to make is now, a few days ago, Tulsi Gabbard says that Mayor Lightfoot's blatant anti-white racism is abhorrent. Our leaders must condemn all racism, including anti-white. So is white a race now? Suburban nationalism is a race? Again, this is a semantic warfare here, and how he controls speech is up to the viewers. And if we're in a Lord of Fly situation where nobody understands the semantics, of course they're going to point fingers to Pilleater, that Pilleater docks their magical gay white nationalist god, and now he should be a person non grata to all neo-Nazi pedophile circles. How ridiculous and pretentious that people can rule certain narratives. That ultimately there is this sad market game of capitalism ruling over us. That they do want us isolated in the suburbs, loving our own hillbillyisms and whatnot, and never striving to something more smart and paternal. How come Gabbard's, anti-white tweet, right, is not considered hate speech? If they think pro-whiteness is hate, why don't they take it down, right? They took down this professor's tweet of white genocide. It's the writing of words. They will find something to hate you for as long as some idiot calls the cops on you. It is very much a will to power war for that matter. So I'm just saying, before any of you exist, I was the one to get in trouble with the police all the way back in 2011. And I still see myself as an avant-garde radical. And I'm hoping I will get that cult following soon. So class dismissed, and thanks for listening.